Hi, I'm Old Norse Specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford. On my Patreon-supported channel about Norse myth and language, I like to sort of slowly over time figure out what my Patreon supporters are interested in knowing and answer it when I have an opportunity. And one of the questions that's come up on my Patreon community is about the differences between Odin in the sagas and Odin as we see him presented in his wisdom in the poetic Edda, specifically in the poem Hávamál. The crux of the seeming contradiction is this. In the sagas, the Odin that we meet is a fairly bloodthirsty, fairly selfish figure who is trying to get men killed so that he can harvest them for his army of fallen warriors in Valhalla, often in English called Valhalla, because of a 19th century pseudo-romanization of that word. And that figure is contrasted with the figure who offers us so much practical and even, at times, fairly kind and even gentle-hearted advice in the poem Hávamál. Now, where I think the actual contradiction is not really between those two characters, quote-unquote, but between the way that a medieval audience thought about these two Odins, if you will, and the way that a modern audience does. For a modern audience, so much of characterization is branding, right? If you think about the brand of a character who's real popular, like a Darth Vader, you know, if you go to the store and you buy Darth Vader crackers, they are presumably going to be, you know, in some way evil or something. They're probably going to be black. You know, maybe there'll be a commercial for them on TV or on YouTube that has an actor reading in a, you know, a heavy breathing voice about him. We have these kind of ready character traits that are sometimes kind of superficial that we associate with any character that's pretty well known to us. I think in the Middle Ages, character is a little bit less about branding in our modern sense. The character, the personality of Odin, is really best established in the sagas. The Saga of the Volsungs is an excellent example, and you can see my recent comprehensive translation of that saga with its medieval fanfic sequel, the Saga of Ragnar Lothbrok, published by Haggett Publishing Company. The Saga of the Volsungs has Odin appearing many times, especially in the early generations of the Volsungs, to assist its heroes. He provides a sword for Sigmundur, and later kills Sigmundur in battle, breaking that same sword. He helps Sigurður pick a horse and helps Sigurður slay a dragon. But clearly, what all of this is for, and we see it explicitly with Sigmundur, is that he wants to harvest these men. He wants them for his army because they're great warriors, and they will do him credit in his final battle against the wolf Fenrir at Ragnarok, when all the gods will be defeated by the monsters and their other enemies. That is his personality, if you will. That is the being that we can call Odin, in the same way that you would take the sum total of my personality and call that me. What we've got in Hávamál is a collection of wisdom stanzas, at least in the first 79 or so stanzas. There we see a lot of wisdom that's very similar to, say, Proverbs, or even sort of more distantly maybe to something like Confucius. World wisdom literature is often fairly similar because the wise people of different cultures often come to very similar conclusions about life. But it makes sense that wisdom is often attributed to whoever the wisest being available is. And we attribute wisdom, regardless of personality, and this is kind of a human universal, not just a Norse thing, to people who are old and people who have suffered. And it's hard to find anyone living in the Norse mythic cosmos who is older than Odin, who after all is old enough to have killed his, I suppose, great-grandfather, the earliest living being, Ymir, And of course, he has suffered, which is something he documents painstakingly, although elusively, vaguely, in Hávamál 138 to 139. He has sacrificed himself to himself on a tree and has apparently died. It'd be difficult for anybody to go through what Odin says he went through. 9 long nights pierced by a spear, without food or drink, and not die. So he is the ultimate old, and he is the ultimate sufferer. And so he is the natural person to attribute great wisdom to, in the same way that great wisdom is attributed to Solomon in the Old Testament, even when it's really not that likely that Solomon specifically is the person who could have said all of this stuff in books of different ages. So traditional wisdom gets attributed to Odin as the correct voice of wisdom for this culture, being the really old, really wise figure in the culture, who's also, there's also old and wise figures on the side of the Jotnar, so-called giants or anti-gods, but they're malevolent toward human beings. Odin may be selfish, but in the end, he's on the side of human beings because he's on the side of cosmic order. He doesn't want us to get eaten and murdered by the giants and their monstrous allies like Fenrir the Wolf. So rather than think about there being two contradictory Odins in the sagas versus the Eddas, consider what a medieval audience is looking for versus what we're looking for. And I remind people again and again that it is the modern audience that wants fully standardized, canonical characters and stories that are fully consistent with one another. The medieval audience, as far as we can tell, really does not care about that kind of cohesive, canonical storytelling. And so, poems contradict one another. To a certain extent, characterization contradicts itself, but not that much. Odin is a pretty consistent character in the sagas in which he appears, and even in the Eddic poems of a narrative nature in which he appears, like Baldur's Draumar is a good example, Baldur's Dreams. So just keep in mind, again, the contradiction is really between us as an audience and the original Old Norse medieval audience, and their respective expectations appertaining thereunto. Alright folks, well, from the most beautiful place in the world, there are many, but they're all in the Rockies. Right here on the Wyoming-Montana line, but just enough over in Montana that I'm going to wish you all the best from beautiful Montana.